Thank you all. 1 year ago, Americans lost a constitutional right for the first time in history, and Republicans ripped it away. Since that Dobbs decision, 14 states have passed total bans on abortions. Another 6 states have severely limited abortion services, and 9 other states have had their abortion bans blocked in court. Every day, women across our country are confronting a dystopian reality, one where Republican politicians have the final say in their health care decisions. Women are forced to stay pregnant against their will, even when their health and lives are at risk. Doctors in some states are having to deny patients the life-saving care that they need or risk being sent to jail. And other providers in states like mine are being pushed to the breaking point, trying to serve an influx of patients from out of state. The fallout has been devastating. Women are heartbroken, they're terrified, but they are also mad, and they are determined, and they are speaking out. And so are Senate Democrats. When women are not going to settle for a country where men in state legislatures are taking away their fundamental freedom to decide what happens to their bodies, where they are treated not like adults capable of making their own health care choices, but like second-class citizens. And they're not going to settle for a country where their daughters and granddaughters have fewer rights than they did just a year ago. I've been fighting for abortion rights since I got here, so I can tell you this fight did not start with Roe, and it did not end with Dobbs. This week, we will be pushing on the Senate floor to pass some really basic, common sense protections that say, yes, you can travel to another state for an abortion. Yes, doctors can provide an abortion in states where it is legal without fear they will be thrown in prison. Yes, we will protect the right to access to birth control. Yes, we will keep your online health and location data private, so it cannot be used against you. Republicans blocked many of those same bills last year, and we all know they blocked the Women's Health Protection Act last Congress as well. But they should pay attention, because Americans are speaking out now loud and clear. Last November, in every single place abortion rights were on the ballot, abortion rights won. Americans do not want politicians making health care decisions for them, and they want their fundamental rights and freedoms to be protected, not taken away. We're going to see this week if any of our Republican colleagues have been listening. So before I turn it over to our leader, who has rightly kept this issue at the forefront, and the incredible women of the Senate Democratic Caucus, many of them who are leading on the legislation being brought to the floor this week, let me also clearly say thank you to the providers across the country who are doing everything they can to provide safe abortion care in this country, and thank you to the advocates who've been fighting to protect access to abortion care. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Senator Schumer, who has been a leader in this fight. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator Murray, for your great leadership on this issue over decades, and for your leadership here today, bringing us all together. Now, as we approach the anniversary of the cataclysmic Dobbs decision, it's an honor to stand with my colleagues here today to say loud and clear, Democrats will never, never stop fighting to protect a woman's right to choose. We all know that from the moment Roe was decided over 50 years ago, the most extreme elements of the Republican Party made it their mission to eliminate freedom of choice. Last summer, that doomsday scenario came true when the MAGA Supreme Court overturned Roe and declared that there was no constitutional right to access abortion. They signaled, that court and the Republican leadership signaled to women across the country that their right to privacy, to health care, and their own autonomy could now be violated. The consequences of the court's decision have been severe. 1 in 3 women have lost abortion access. 17 million individuals can no longer access the full range of reproductive care. And those who suffer the most have often been rural and low-income Americans, people of color, members of the LGBTQ plus community, particularly the trans community, and Black Americans. The MAGA Supreme Court decision means our children will grow up in a world where they have fewer liberties than previous generations. That's not what the American people want. The American people rejected MAGA Republicans' anti-choice agenda last fall, but Republicans still don't seem to get the message. Today, 14 states have enacted near-total abortion bans, and in Florida, Republicans passed a 6-week abortion ban. 6 weeks. That's before many women even know they're pregnant. How can that be considered anything but cruel, inhumane? Now Republicans try to dress up their extreme agenda as being about states' rights. But the American people know the truth. They saw when nearly every Republican in the Senate sponsored and voted in favor of a nationwide abortion ban, because that's what this is all about. Republicans deep down want to ban abortions for everyone, everywhere. So that's why this week, our senators behind me will be asking consent on common-sense legislation to protect women's most fundamental rights. We will show that Democrats are more united than we have ever been on pro-choice legislation, while Republicans remain hell-bent on eliminating women's choice. We'll continue to do everything in our power to fight back against these attacks, including confirming judges like Julie Rickleman to the federal bench. Few lawyers have fought harder, smarter, or more effectively than Julie to protect women's rights in America. And will expose the Republicans' radical anti-choice agenda for what it is, an endless pursuit of a nationwide abortion ban, hounded by hard-right MAGA groups. So, we will keep fighting. We will not relent. We will not give up. We know history is on our side and are determined to preserve the precious rights that are the bedrock of America.
Thank you, Leader Schumer. To all of my colleagues, I'm so proud to stand with. As we know, this Saturday marks 1 year since the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade and upended 50 years of precedent protecting a woman's right to choose. Over the last year, we have seen extremist politicians in states across the country severely restrict women's reproductive rights. We have also heard real stories, the impact that this has had on women, like Amanda, who told me about how she was forced to wait until she was near death and suffering from infection before she could even terminate her unviable pregnancy in Texas. One of the only options for women in situations like this is traveling to my state, to Nevada, to access critical reproductive care, and that's only if they can afford to do so. I am proud to be from a pro-choice state that takes women's health care seriously, but even though Nevada is a safe place for women who need an abortion, far-right politicians from outside my state are working to bar women from coming to us to get the help that they need. They're trying to outlaw women's constitutional right to interstate travel. I've seen it, and I've said this before. I will say this again. This is about controlling women. It's dangerous, it is cruel, and it is unacceptable. That's why today my colleagues and I are reintroducing the Freedom to Travel for Healthcare Act. This legislation reaffirms that women have a fundamental right to travel interstate and it really makes it crystal clear that states cannot prosecute women or anyone who helps them for going to another state to get the critical reproductive care that they need. In the year since Roe versus Wade was overturned, it's become increasingly clear that we need this legislation. Far-right politicians won't stop in their crusade to roll back women's rights across this country, but we will never stop standing up to them and fighting to protect women's fundamental freedoms. Thank you.
Well, good morning, and I want to thank Senator Murray, Senator Schumer, and all of my colleagues behind us. We are united, and this is very important. We are united to protect and restore reproductive freedom for every American. And as we keep saying, but it's hard to wrap your head around the fact that for 50 years, Roe v. Wade protected our reproductive freedom and our right to make our own health care decisions. For 50 years. Then 1 year ago, it suddenly was gone. And now young people have fewer rights than their moms, their grandmothers. And women are literally being hurt every day, and their very lives in many cases are being threatened. It's heart-wrenching to hear what is happening to women in states around this country. In Michigan, we decided to do something different. Last November, we had the largest voter turnout in a midterm election ever. And one of the measures on the ballot enshrined the right to reproductive freedom in our Constitution. And it passed by a strong 13-point margin in our state. And it was very clear that Michiganders understand that healthcare decisions should be made by people, individuals, not by judges and not by politicians. And I would add that this has been fully implemented because we have a Democratic governor and a Democratic state House and Senate. There is a difference when we are electing Democratic governors versus Republican governors across the country. So now it's time for us to do something at the national level because your freedom should not depend on your zip code. We are laser focused on the legislation that's been talked about today, the efforts on the floor, the actions to restore reproductive freedom for every American. Because it all comes down to who makes the decision. Who makes the decision? Right-wing Republican lawmakers, right-wing extremists on the U.S. Supreme Court, or you? We stand with the women of this country. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Senator Stabenow. Thank you, Senator Murray, for your leadership. I was just looking at my colleagues and thinking about how they are all leaders who came into power when a lot of people told them no. I don't think a lot of people would think that Senator Duckworth could have gone and served in the military like she did, and she said she was going to do it, and she paid dearly for our country. Or Senator Shaheen and Senator Hassan being the first women in the United States of America to serve as both governors and senators, and every single woman on this stage was a first in their own ways, and they had a whole bunch of people saying no. And right now, what that Supreme Court did a year ago is they said no. They said no to the women of this country. They said, we're going to reverse 50 years of precedent and send you backwards. Literally, the leaked Alito opinion cited treatises from the Middle Ages. As someone once said, why move forward when they nailed it back in 1223? Well, guess what? This is 2023, and the women aren't going to take it. Everything we said would happen when I thought back to the events that we did together a year ago has happened. It is a patchwork of laws across this country. You have doctors leaving certain states because either they're going to be prosecuted or they're going to get in trouble, or most likely they're not going to be able to give the kind of health care that they believe they should give. You have women in states like Texas who have been forced to carry pregnancies for days after learning their baby would not survive because their doctors can't legally provide care. You think of the heartbreaking story of that 10-year-old in Ohio that no one believed, that the media said, a number of people said wasn't true, and then it turned out to be totally true. She had to go to another state, a 10-year-old girl, after being raped, to be able to get her health care. So all of that is what we predicted, and that is why you're seeing these overwhelming number of men and women showing up at the polls and voting for freedom, something we have all stood up for years. One of the bills that I hope you look at is the Uphold Privacy Act. This means getting serious about the role that the social media companies and data brokers play in making our personal health data exposed. For too long, companies have profited off of Americans' online data while consumers are left in the dark. I'm leading the Uphold Privacy Act with Senators Warren and Hirono. We're going to ask for unanimous consent to pass this legislation. And it simply says that women making their most personal health care decisions should be able to go to their doctor's appointments and consult specialists without worrying about their data being purchased or sold. That's how bad this is getting. So I think it is really clear that we are not going to back down in this fight because the people that we represent aren't backing down either. Thank you very much, and I will turn it over to Senator Jeanne Shaheen.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Good morning. I want to talk about the devastating impact that the Dobbs decision has had on our female service members. But before I do that, I want to respond to a story that broke this morning. One of the things that we have heard all of my colleagues talk about is the fact that since the Dobbs decision, whenever women and voters have had a chance to overturn Dobbs, to reinforce the importance of having women have access to reproductive rights, that they have succeeded. Well, now what we're learning this morning is that there are billionaires who are funding efforts to manipulate our voting process to keep women and voters from having a chance to weigh in on this issue. That is just unacceptable. It's another example of an effort by the far right to try and change our voting laws so that they can make sure that the people who are voting are the people who support them, rather than listening to people across this country. Now, to go back to the impact on servicewomen and military families have no choice over where they and their loved ones are stationed and what state laws may govern women's bodies. Odds are that women who are stationed in Republican-controlled states have lost reproductive freedoms. Now, the Pentagon enacted policies providing necessary leave for reproductive health care services, but that's not enough, and that's why I've introduced legislation, the Protecting Service Members and Military Families Access to Health Care Act, which would codify these policies and ensure that service members and their families can access non-covered reproductive health care, including abortion services, regardless of where they're stationed. Last Thursday, Senator Murray and I had a chance to hear from a young woman who was in the military for 4 years. During that time, she needed an abortion. She told us that she was afraid to tell her commanding officer that she had to go someplace to get her health care because she was afraid she would be drummed out of the Army. She had a shock reaction to the abortion. She went into shock. She said she had to go back to work, and she was afraid to tell anybody why she was so ill because, again, she was afraid she would be drummed out of the Army. 17% of the people in our military are women. Without those women, we would not be meeting our recruitment goals. We need to ensure that those women, like all of the men in the military, have access to the health care they need. That's what my legislation is about. We will be asking unanimous consent to move it this week. Thank you. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. So as you've heard from my colleagues over and over again, women and families are facing serious consequences since their rights and freedoms have been stripped away. And I and Senate Democrats will not stand idly by. In my home state of Wisconsin, women are living under a criminal abortion ban that was passed in 1849. And I did not misspeak. It was passed in 1849, 1 year after Wisconsin became a state. And living under that draconian criminal ban has been nothing short of dire for Wisconsin families. I met a woman whose water broke at 17 weeks. She went to see her doctor. He said there was nothing he could do. And she had to, she didn't get care until her fever reached 101 degrees and sepsis had begun. Another Wisconsin couple who I spoke with were told that there were serious anomalies with the pregnancy at 13 weeks. But she was forced to stay pregnant with an unviable pregnancy and play travel agency and lawyer to figure out how to get the health care she needed out of state. Another Wisconsin woman reports bleeding for more than 10 days from an incomplete miscarriage after emergency room staff would not treat her. And sadly, the list of these harrowing stories goes on and on. Wisconsin women have been left with no good options. Some women who have means are forced to travel across state lines to get the care that they need. In fact, Planned Parenthood in Illinois is experiencing 12 times the number of monthly patients from Wisconsin since Roe fell, an influx of hundreds of patients a month. And these are the ones who can afford to travel to access the care that they need. Others are either self-administering medication abortion without medical supervision, or they're forced to carry pregnancies they didn't choose. As long as women have to travel to exercise the right to control their bodies and get the health care they need, it is our job to help. And that's why I'm proud to lead my colleagues in introducing legislation to help women access reproductive health services by providing grants that offset the cost of travel and related expenses. And with states like Wisconsin criminalizing the essential health care, our healthcare professionals have to travel out of state to get the training that they need to serve their patients. Senator Murray and I have teamed up to address this and ensure that our health professionals have the resources they need and the access to this vital component of their medical training. These are the remedies that we need until we can finally fully restore women's rights and freedoms, until we finally pass our Women's Health Protection Act, the bill that would do what Americans are demanding, guarantee access to abortion care everywhere across this country, and restore the right to comprehensive reproductive health care for millions of Americans. This year, we garnered more support than we've ever had before, and I will not stop fighting until this passes into law. Having the freedom to control your health care, your body, and your future, free from government control, is a fundamental right. And I refuse to let the next generation of women be left with fewer rights than their mothers and their grandmothers. With that, I will pass it on to Senator Hassan, I think. Yep.
Well, thank you, Senator Baldwin, for your important advocacy for women's reproductive freedom. And thank you, Senator Murray, for your leadership, and to all my colleagues who have participated this morning, and a whole lot of colleagues who couldn't make it. I thank you all for what you are doing to bring us together on this issue. The Supreme Court's decision nearly 1 year ago today dealt a devastating blow to a woman's fundamental freedom. At stake right now is the principle that women are free and equal citizens in our democracy and that they should be able to chart their own futures. Across the country, individual women are grappling with the very personal impacts of the Supreme Court decision. These impacts are often horrific and jeopardize the health of women and the security of their families. At the same time, like my colleagues here, I have been inspired over the last year by the women and men all across the country who are speaking up for a woman's freedom and who have voted to protect reproductive rights. I still remember one of the field organizers in my campaign last year coming back from a day at the doors and saying, as she asked a man in New Hampshire what his top priority was in the upcoming midterm, him reaching behind him and moving his 8-year-old granddaughter in front of him and saying, "I'm voting for her." This is about the future of our daughters and our granddaughters. This is about the future of our country. Anti-choice extremists continue their efforts to try to ban abortion all across the country. But what I know is that in the live free or die state, we take our freedoms really, really seriously. I think all Americans do. This is about a woman's right to have her fundamental freedom protected. It's about whether we are going to be full and equal citizens in our democracy. It's about whether 1/2 of the population is going to be treated as second-class citizens or whether we are going to regain our full citizenship. So I thank my colleagues again. We know we have a long road ahead of us, but the women of this country and liberty-loving people in this country will stand with women as we fight to regain the power to chart our own course in life. Thank you all, and with that, I'll turn it over to Senator Duckworth.
Thank you. Well, I'm here today to ask a very simple question. When exactly was the moment that our country decided that American women no longer had the right to bodily autonomy, or were no longer capable of making decisions, good decisions about their own bodies? Our nation was just fine when I made decisions to use my arms and legs to fly helicopters in combat. It was even okay with me leaving 25% of this body, both my legs and parts of my arm, on the battlefield in defense of this great nation. In fact, I had people pinning ribbons and medals on my chest because I made those choices of what to do with my body. So my question is, precisely when do the folks pushing anti-choice policies think that American women no longer have that basic human right to make our own decisions about our own health? I ask because over the past year since the Dobbs decision, we have faced an onslaught of anti-choice bills that would effectively turn women into second-class citizens, transforming us into people from being people with autonomy to vessels subject to the political whims of lawmakers whose beliefs tend to more towards insurrectionists than feminists. Lawmakers who think that making America great again equates to stripping away women's rights again. So let's be honest. The GOP's push to restrict reproductive rights access happening is not about protecting life. It's about controlling women and our bodies. If they wanted to protect life, they'd stop trying to strip away our health care. Or maybe they'd do something like standing up to the NRA. So no, this isn't about looking out for families. It's not even about trying to grow families. I had to have a DNC after I had a miscarriage because I was trying to grow my family. I had that miscarriage in the middle of a series of IVF procedures and could not begin another IVF procedure without a DNC. This was well after 6 weeks. But thank goodness I am from a choice state of Illinois, and I was able to access that DNC so that I could immediately begin another IVF cycle, which resulted in my baby girl, Miley, who is now 5 years old. So I was okay, allowed to make those decisions. Look, I know that a lot of us are tired from the seemingly endless fight to protect our most basic human rights, but we can do more. What can we do? We can pass bills like our Right to Contraception Act or the Women's Health Protection Act. These things allow women to seek the reproductive health care that they need, and they should not be ashamed. And in fact, when I was in the Army and was deployed to Iraq, it was so early in that conflict that there was no sanitary support. So what did the Army do? They put me on the birth control patch so that I could skip my menstrual cycle 2, 3, 4 months in a row so that I could continue to fly combat missions because I was not going to have access to sanitary supplies. So it's okay to control my reproductive cycle for the needs of the American people, for the needs of the Army. And yet, when it comes to choice, when it comes to the rest of my reproductive health care, I cannot be trusted to make those decisions. Our military women cannot be trusted to make those decisions. This is hypocrisy. So today, tomorrow, and the tomorrow after that, each of us need to keep pushing. We need to keep working and fighting until we pass legislation that ensures women have the same say over their bodies that men have. And you can count on me to stick with this fight as long as it takes. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, I have the privilege of going last before I turn this back over to Senator Murray, and I am proud to stand with Senator Murray, who's been in this fight for a long time here in the United States Senate, and with all the women, Democratic senators in the United States Senate, and my Democratic colleagues who are fighting every day to be sure that a woman controls her reproductive future. Because in the year since the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade, attempts to ban abortion and restrict women's rights, well, as everyone has told you, they have been relentless. These actions have already had devastating consequences. And as you've already heard, we have all heard these gut-wrenching stories of little girls who were raped and couldn't get an abortion. We've heard stories of women who were miscarrying but couldn't access the care they needed right away because the doctors were afraid of being arrested by providing them basic health care. And even more, we've heard stories of doctors being sued or prosecuted simply for doing their jobs. And what's even worse is that some extreme Republicans want to go even further, banning abortion nationally. This would even ban abortion in pro-choice states like my state of Nevada. So let me be clear. We won't let them. We, all of us here, all of my Democratic colleagues, we won't let them. Nevadans sent me to the Senate to fight for women, to fight for our rights. And as long as I'm here and Senate Democrats remain in the majority, we won't let a restrictive abortion ban pass. So 1 year after the disastrous Dobbs decision, the fight to protect reproductive freedoms continues. I can tell you I will be there every step of the way, as well as all the women who stood behind me today and those who weren't able to be with us. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Senator Murray. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're happy to answer any questions. Yes.